Hi, I'm David Hughes and I'm Emeritus Professor of Food Marketing at Imperial College London. What I do for a living, actually what I do is talk relentlessly around the known world. Who do I talk to? I talk to food companies, food businesses, governments about global developments in the food industry. So what's the story for the students? Well, surprise, surprise, it's global food industry developments. And I start, of course, where you should start, which is with consumers. So looking at this great challenge that we've got. Here we are at 7 billion people in the world, we're going to 9. Are we going to cope? And there are all the issues associated with that. And then normally I take a good look at how emerging country consumers are different than from those in the developed countries, for example. Of course, you tend to focus on China and just point out the different cultures, heritage, traditions associated with food. And then I work my way through the supply chain. Let's say from consumers down to look at global retail trends, for example. Who are the big players? What are they doing? Where are they? How are things changing in retail? What's the implications for food manufacturers, for example? And then slowly, as you can see, wander my way back through the farm, even back into farm input manufacturers, the Monsantos, the Syngentas of this world, who are producing special inputs for farming, so special food ingredients, but in the end, all that has to be driven by what's happening at the consumer end. Well, if they're at least half as passionate and enthusiastic as I am about the food industry, then by the time I finish with them, then I've done a job. And really it's to show that the wonderful thing about being in agriculture and food is that as I go around the world, everybody's got a view about it. I mean, here I am so-called expert, but whoever I talk to, they say, actually, I don't agree, or I've got a different view. And I think that's brilliant. Normally if you're a professor of something, then it assumes that you're some sort of expert. If I was a professor of ball bearing manufacture, people would say, well, isn't that interesting? And that would be the end of the discussion. But the minute you mention food, people say, really? And they've got a view and they want to share it with you. That's the great thing about food. Remember, we eat it 3 times a day, typically, if we're lucky. And so sort of brilliant overall. If you're going to do something, you might as well be passionate and enthusiastic about it. And the food industry globally is changing at such a rate of knots, and I think it's important to be on top of that. The conventional wisdom, though, is that this lot here, this lot would be a smallish town in China. That's what they get through in a week. So it gives you a sort of snapshot, if you will, of Chinese consumption behaviour. And what do we see here? That they're big on pork. Pork is a staple. Huge consumers of vegetables, lesser extent fruit. Actually, they're quite good at beer. You've got to love them. And the conventional wisdom is that as their income grows, they will increasingly so-called westernize their diet. Do you think they will? Yeah? No? So that they say the conventional wisdom is they'll move from this to this. So here's the American family, much more processed foods, etc. Lurking somewhere will be bottles of Coke, or at least cans of Coke. And I do lots of work in emerging markets, and I'm not convinced. I mean, clearly, as people's incomes go up, they tend to trade up in terms of diet, tend to eat more meat, tend to move towards dairy products that they may not have had any track record with before. But actually, it depends where you are in the world. And when I'm in China, I notice that that's a civilization state of 2,000 years, and they have strong food cultures, heritage, traditions that they hang on to. And at the margin, of course, they become more Western in terms of perhaps going to KFC or going to McDonald's, although it's really intriguing. If you go to a KFC in China, it's a Chinese KFC. The products tend to be, it's pork buns in the morning. It's soup with chicken, etc. So it's KFC with a Chinese twist, as you might expect. If there's some meat guys in here, then look at what do I think is happening in the world. If you look at the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, global food price indices, which are published every month, then what it shows is that globally meat has never been more expensive. It's the highest price index, the highest price level it's ever been. And of course, in part that's because there's a great sucking noise around the world, and that's demand for meat products, particularly in emerging countries like China. Whereas their incomes go up, they will eat more meat. And so what's happened over the last 5 years or so, you can see global meat consumption has increased by, whatever it is, 30 million tons.
But actually, again, if you get into the detail, most of the growth came from China, and most was for chicken and fish. And so again, here you go, look at, just out of interest, if you take total meat consumption globally, what are the big items? It's pork, it's poultry, it's fish and seafood. And yet, from our perspective, we tend to think more of, say, beef and lamb, if you will, which internationally are marginal minority meats. They're premium meats, but they're minority meats. Most of the world doesn't eat